Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Fast Keto. I'm thrilled to have Craig Emmerich back on the show today. And today we talk all about protein and fat ratios and weight loss and gluconeogenesis and really dive deep on the topic of how it all works and why a lot of people doing carnivore or keto carnivore may not be getting the results that they want to see, may not be getting the weight loss they want to see, or maybe even gaining weight doing carnivore especially. So it's a really fun episode because we got to dive deep on some of the biochemistry in really simple terms of how all of these different pathways work in the body and the best ways to get the results that you want to see. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode today with Craig Emmerich. All right, welcome Craig. Thank you so much for being back here on Fast Keto again. And how's it going there on the Hawaiian Islands?
Thanks for having me on. We're doing good. We're kind of digesting the situation like everybody else and trying to do our part and stay in our condo as much as we can and maybe get out to get some sunlight and stuff. But yeah, we're coping.
I'm a little jealous that you guys might be stuck in Hawaii for a while. Like, of all the places in the world, I probably would choose there, although it probably would make it kind of hard if you can't go outside.
Yeah, it's if you get on lockdown, it would be tough. Yeah, for sure. But there's definitely worse places you could be stuck. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to have you back on today. We're going to talk about some fun topics today. A few of them all pertaining particularly to the carnivore space, but also keto too. And one thing I've been noticing, I don't know if you have noticed this, but I've been seeing, and I've kind of been anticipating this happening, but I've been seeing people who have gone from keto to carnivore back to keto. Have you been seeing that much?
Somewhat. We in our book we talked about, in our carnivore cookbook, we talk about what's your why, and that's a very important stepping stone of going into the carnivore diet, because you got to identify what's your why. Why do you want to do carnivore? Because it can really change your approach and change, your results and how you do things.
I'm sorry, Craig. I'm sorry. I have to close the window. There's ambulances going by. So sorry. Just 1 second.
Yep.
Now, Craig, one thing I've been seeing a little bit in the keto space, and something I've been sort of anticipating would happen, is people going back to keto from carnivore. And I'm curious if you've been seeing much of that too, and what your thoughts are.
Somewhat, yeah. In our carnivore cookbook, we talk a lot about what's your why, because your reason for doing carnivore, your why, can really change your approach and change your results and change whether you stick with it long term or not. Somebody like me, where the why is Lyme disease, and somebody with chronic disease, their why is they're trying to heal and they're trying to get rid of these problems they have. And it also can be, then carnivore can be used kind of as an ultimate elimination diet in that situation. And that's, kind of what I did to find what things I can tolerate. And for me, I'm not going to be adding any significant amount of plants anytime soon, because when I do, my pain returns, my migrating pain returns, and I just start really feeling bad again. So for me, I don't see that happening. If your why is just weight loss and you want to check it out, that's fine. And if you want to pop back and forth between carnivore and keto in that situation, great. There's nothing wrong with that. But it depends on your why. So, yeah. I think a lot of people they're checking it out. They want to see how they feel, and maybe they miss some of their, almond flour, cupcakes or whatever they were doing on keto, and maybe they'll go back and forth there. But, for a lot of people, that can be just fine.
Now, I think the biggest question out there in the carnivore space seems to always come back to protein and fat ratios. And I really want to dig into this with you. The first thing I just want to start with is, what's so fascinating to me is that people seem to do well on both.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to go from person to person where, and I'm not sure if this comes back to perhaps someone's insulin resistance or what their metabolic situation is. If someone is, highly insulin resistant and they go from standard American diet to carnivore and they're doing like really high protein and high fat, and they're not seeing kind of any results. They're feeling the same as they did before. They're not really seeing a lot of benefit. In some cases, moderating that protein potentially with a higher fat approach at the beginning could be something maybe that would help them balance out some of that hormonal imbalance. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so a couple things to unpack there. First of all, I think there's a misnomer that's been kind of spread by certain people in the carnivore community that carnivore is eat all you want. Don't track anything. Eat fatty cuts of meat and eat all you want, no matter what your goals are. And we see a lot of that. We in our carnivore group on Facebook, we see people all the time. Don't track macros, just eat meat and you'll do great and you'll lose weight no matter what. And it's like, you can gain weight eating carnivore. You can gain weight eating keto. I mean, you can gain weight on any of these approaches. Yes. And so you do have to be concerned and track certain things depending on your goals. And that's, the misunderstanding as far as like dietary fat. This is a chart from our book Keto, and it's the fatty acid metabolism. And the reason this is important to understand is because there's only two biological pathways for dietary fat, right? You can either burn it as fuel or you can store it in your adipose, store it in your fat cells. That's it. So that, once you eat fat, and it gets digested, it goes to one of those two paths. And so when your goal is body fat loss, when your body is already high fat, the diet doesn't have to be. You want to modulate the dietary fat to use more of the body fat for fuel. And this pathway, points that out very clearly. You get dietary fat comes in, it gets digested, and for those that can't see it on the video, it turns into a chylomicron, and then those chylomicrons can either go right to the muscle and be burned as fuel, or it can go into fat storage. That's it. That's the only destination for the chylomicrons. So, when people say you can eat endless fat as long as it's just carnivore, and your goal is weight loss, I think that's where people stall. That's where people come in and they maybe gain weight and they're like, well, this doesn't work for me, and they go back to keto. So it can be connected to a lot of those things. But insulin resistance, now that's a different kind of animal when it comes to this. But the thing about insulin resistance is primarily an overstuffed adipose tissue disease. So what happens is your adipose tissue is your fat cells. Your fat cells, they store fat as triglycerides. And when those fat cells that you have on your body get overstuffed, so they get too much fat in them, they say, I can't take anymore, reject insulin. And so they reject insulin and become insulin resistant, which makes the fat have less places to go, and then it builds up in other tissues and organs, and this is the insulin resistance type 2 diabetes cycle. So what is the goal to reverse diabetes? The goal is to shrink the adipose. So this all kind of comes back to this fat going in the adipose and out of the adipose. And so you have these fat cells, and fat can go into them and fat can come out of them. And that's called fat flux. And what you want to lose body fat is you want more fat coming out than going in. And this is also kind of a misunderstanding in the keto community as well, that when you're keto, you suddenly start burning fat for fuel. Well, your body is always regulating fuel in its blood, and it adjusts fuel based on demand and supply needs. And so there's always fat coming out of your fat cells. Even when you're eating tons of sugar and you still have fat flux going on, you still have some fat, at a much lower level than when you're keto, some fat being used as fuel, along with all the sugar and everything else that's getting dumped into the body. But it's glucose, it's free fatty acids, and it's ketones. And those are the fuels that the body's just sort of adjusting and based on what's available. And so going back to, you've got overstuffed adipose. So you want to lose body fat. Best way to do that is cut out all the carbs. And this is back to oxidative priority, what you've talked about. So you cut the carbs out so there's not another fuel to compete. And you get enough protein for your lean mass. And then you use fat as a lever to to get to your goal, which is use more fat out of storage. So if you adjust the dietary fat down, that means there's less going into storage. That forces the body to pull more fat out of storage quicker and use more fat out of storage as fuel. That will shrink the adipose. That'll help reverse type 2 diabetes. So that should be the goal and the focus.
Yeah, I think one part, there's so much that we're still learning about carnivore. I think one part that we're still learning a lot about is gluconeogenesis and how it plays in to a carnivore diet, because we have, say, like Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, she says 100 grams of protein turns into 60 grams of glucose. So you have glucose that your body is making, your liver is making when you are, even though you're not taking in any glucose exogenously, your liver's still making it. Your liver's making glucose and it's making ketones if you're doing zero carb.
Yeah.
But there is that glucose that is still being made. And I think there is such a debate over whether gluconeogenesis is demand driven or supply driven. And I'm tending to think that the answer might be a little bit of both, based on the fact that the liver is making glucose all the time in order to supply it to our brain, and the essential, the glucose, the essential, there's a word for it I'm missing right now, but obligate glucose demand that our brain has an obligate glucose demand for. So there is that process happening all the time. So say someone is on carnivore and they're just eating tons and tons of protein. At some point, some of that gluconeogenesis is going to be supply driven. So in a sense, couldn't that also potentially stall someone if they are, and I know we could talk about protein overfeeding studies and that kind of thing too, but couldn't that at some point put someone more in a glycolytic state and just block them from burning fat, or be spiking their insulin so much from all this glucose?
Okay, so let's unpack that as well. So just to clarify, when you eat protein, the liver's not making glucose necessarily. It's some of the glycogen that's in the liver is getting dumped into the bloodstream, but there's a reason why it's doing that. And so what happens is protein raises insulin. All fuels raise insulin. This is a chart from our Carnivore Cookbook. That's for those that can't see it, it's a chart of carbohydrates, fat, and protein and their insulin response.
I want to look at it. Which page is it on?
That's on page 47.
Perfect.
So,
I got it.
This is also kind of a misunderstanding as well, is that people think that if you eat fat, you don't raise insulin, but you do, and you raise it enough to store it. And goes back to fat flux. Your body has a bunch of fat coming in the diet. It wants to shut the fat coming out of the fat stores off. So it raises insulin a little bit to shut off the fat coming out. Because otherwise your blood's going to be flooded with fat because you get all this coming in the diet, and a bunch keeps coming out of the fat stores. Now your blood is oversaturated, and the body doesn't like high fuel in the blood of any kind of fuel, including fat. You can die from too high of dietary fat, fat in the blood.
Yes.
And so protein is in between. And then of course carbs have the highest spike. But the protein spike is what people also may or may not understand is that you need insulin to use protein to build muscle, okay? So if you didn't have any response of insulin when you ate protein, you wouldn't be able to build lean mass. And so the body, when you eat protein, you get this increase in insulin. But protein by itself does not raise glucose. And what happens when you raise insulin? Blood glucose is going to drop. That's if insulin goes up, blood glucose goes down. That's just the way the body works. So if you just have protein and no carbs coming in, protein will increase insulin, and your blood sugar would plummet. You go into you have low blood sugar state. So the body's smart, and what it does when you eat protein, it also stimulates glucagon, which tells the liver, okay, release a little bit of the glucose that you've been storing for me, just to keep blood sugars stable while this protein's coming in, so that I can raise insulin without having your blood sugar plummet. Keep it balanced then the insulin's action will enable you to use the protein and make muscle out of it. So that's what she's saying is not correct, in that insinuates that the protein you're eating is all getting turned into glucose through gluconeogenesis. And that's not what is happening. And gluconeogenesis as a process is primarily demand driven. That doesn't mean you can't force its action by eating 300 grams or 500 grams of protein in a meal, which is probably not even physically possible. But what gluconeogenesis does is it enables us to be keto or carnivore.
Right.
If you didn't have gluconeogenesis, you wouldn't be able to ramp dietary carbohydrates down so low, because your body would run out of glucose. There are certain needs in the body and the brain that need glucose even when you're keto. So the body uses gluconeogenesis to turn some of the protein, either in the diet or from your body, into glucose when it needs it. But it doesn't do this if it doesn't have to. It takes ATP are like energy units, and so it takes about 5 ATP to turn a protein molecule into a glucose molecule, and then another couple ATP to burn that glucose. That's an expensive process for the body, especially when for just 2 ATP it can just burn glucose that is available, or burn fat that's available. And if your goal is fat loss, you've got a lot of fat around. Why would it not just use that stored fat for fuel, instead of going through this expensive process of turning protein into glucose, which it doesn't really need at that moment, if your demand is not great for glucose at that moment. So that is a little bit of a misunderstanding of how the body works when it comes to protein and glucose metabolism.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting just to delve into some of these topics deeper, because I think that a lot of them are debated. And, even things like your chart in here, I've seen research saying insulin doesn't spike insulin at all. That's what people say all the time. And then I've personally seen more research saying that it does. It's just a small amount, like your chart shows here. But these topics are being debated all the time. And I don't know if it's because we don't fully know the answers to some of the questions, or if there's just a misunderstanding of some of the biochemical processes. But when someone eats, say, a lot of protein, and say it has some of those amino acids that will tend to spike insulin more, there's a certain amount that is needed in order to trigger muscle protein synthesis, right? So
yep,
that amount sort of needs to be met. And then if there is sort of excess in terms of someone's need for protein, then is that being stored later in the form of glycogen later, or?
Yep. So basically there, what you're talking about is, so there's a leucine threshold where your body needs a certain amount of the right amino acids to trigger muscle protein synthesis. So you need complete proteins to build muscle, and there's a PCAA scores that kind of rate different proteins as far as their ability to trigger, muscle synthesis and how complete their proteins are. We talk about that a little bit in our carnivore book as well. But when it comes down to it, it's basically come down to the leucine levels that are reached or not. And if you reach those levels, then muscle protein synthesis is triggered, and it goes through a process. It's mTOR, and this process is pretty energy intensive. This is one of the reasons that protein has such a high thermic effect of food. Thermic effect is how much energy the body has to use to digest a macronutrient. Fat is one of the lowest, only like 3%. So all that is just energy to the body. Carbs are a little higher, and then protein is the highest, like 25 to 30%. So what that means is if you consume 100 calories of protein, you really only net, 75 or 70 in the body, because that thermic effect, the body has to expend all this energy to digest it. And so anyway, mTOR is a very energy intensive process. So once it is triggered, it goes off, does its thing, and then it takes a little time to rest. It doesn't immediately do another cycle. How long, it's kind of debatable, all of that. But here's what happens in the body is protein takes a while to digest. And it's not like you eat this massive steak and it's immediately all in the, all that protein is immediately in the bloodstream, right? So what happens is you get this slow trickle of these amino acids coming in. When they get to that threshold, mTOR is triggered. But guess what? There's still a trickle of amino acids still coming into the bloodstream. So it goes through its cycle. It does a rest. And then when enough protein is available again, you hit that threshold, maybe 30 grams of protein, you trigger it again, right? So you could, from a single meal, you could trigger mTOR 2 or even 3 times from one meal. So it's going to prioritize as this protein is digested. Again, it takes a while to digest, a lot of protein, and then just trigger when it's available and trigger it again when it's available. And that's primarily what happens with protein. Now, again, you push that too far and you're eating 500 grams of protein in one sitting. Now the body might have to prioritize, say, I got too much, turn some of this into glucose and store it off, that kind of thing. But in reasonable amounts, it's going to just keep doing muscle protein synthesis off of it.
So I know a lot of people they say people who are wanting to lose weight and they've been doing keto, but they fear doing a higher protein approach because they see their blood glucose go up. And yet a lot of times that's not actually directly from what they're eating. It's because the liver is then releasing glucagon and releasing blood sugar. I remember learning about this mechanism in biochemistry, and I was like, it's like this fail safe, that pancreas releases that glucagon for you to push up your blood sugar, or else the insulin you would have a hypoglycemic event, right?
Exactly. And so that's the process that's going on in the body. And the people that come in, and I think again it's back to these understandings and some of the definitions of carnivore that people are putting out there, that if you have insulin resistance, do carnivore, don't track anything, and just eat until you're full. Every meal, just eat until you're stuffed. And
they say stuffed.
Then you'll lose weight and you'll do great. And that's just not true. It's just not a fact. And especially when you're trying to reverse insulin resistance, which again needs to shrink the adipose tissue, which means you got to burn more fat off your body than you're burning off from the diet. And so that's why in our book I took all these cuts of protein, all these animal proteins, and I made these huge charts where I sorted by protein to energy ratio. That creates what I think is the easiest diet on the planet.
Yes.
Eat carnivore. If your goal is weight loss, move down the chart. If your goal is maintenance or you want to lose less, go up the chart. That's it. That's all you have to do, because when you go down the chart, those cuts of meat have more protein. Yep, on the lower right there. Those cuts have, when you go down the chart, the cuts have more protein, less fat. When you go up the charts, they have less protein, more fat. And the protein to energy then, changes. So that gives you the tool to say, okay, I need to lose weight. I want to reverse insulin resistance. I'm going to stay towards the bottom of those charts, which will give me adequate protein while keeping the dietary fat down a bit, and allow my body to burn the body fat for fuel, shrinking the adipose tissue and reversing insulin resistance. That is to me the most simple diet you can have for achieving that goal.
Absolutely. I was telling Maria, these are my favorite from the book, because, if you're someone like me and you've been vegetarian for most of your life, I had to learn what all these cuts are and, what they mean. And, I'll eat any cut of beef. It's going to be extremely nutritious, but it's really interesting to learn what, the different ones are, and you have it for all different protein sources too. So it's really helpful. Now, if someone, say, was coming to this space and they're new and they're coming because their doctor said they were pre-diabetic, insulin resistant, metabolic syndrome, and they're like, you should do, keto or keto carnivore, what would be a way that you would advise to them so that they could make sure that they're not following the wrong advice and just, all you can eat meat and not seeing results and kind of struggling?
Yeah, we saw some of this in keto too. We saw as keto got popular, you got all these people that came in and said, eat all the fats. To lose weight, you have to eat more fat. Or to lose weight, you got to eat at least 80 or 90% dietary fat. And there's zero biology to support that. And in fact, you want to modulate fat down a bit if you want to burn more off the body. And we're seeing some of that in carnivore as well. And some of it, I think, is unintended. Like Dr. Paul Saladino, which is a great guy. We love him. We're doing a giveaway with him with our books. He says a lot of times, eat the fattier meats, and go for fattier meats and all that. But then if you listen to his videos, I just listened to one of them recently. He said that for what he thinks is a good ratio of fat and protein for weight loss is a 1-to-1 fat to protein in calories. What's that look like? 100 grams of protein, 90 grams of fat. That's a 1-to-1 in calories, right? 2-to-1. I misspoke. 2-to-1 fat to protein. But I think everybody converts that as, twice as many grams of fat as protein grams. No, he said in calories. So calories, 2-to-1 would be 90 grams fat, 100 grams protein.
Right.
If somebody is coming to us for weight loss, putting them on about 100 grams of protein and 90 grams or less fat is what we tell them.
Right.
So when you say eat all the fatty cuts, and yet what you're really saying when you prescribe it is really, okay, moderate the fat a bit. It's not eat endless fat. And so I think it's part of the messaging that's getting misunderstood. Yeah,
and I think that also it depends on what you're coming from. So I know, for example, Dr. Saladino, he was vegan and then he was vegetarian and he did carnivore because he had eczema, which was his unresolved health issue. If you're someone who is not coming from like a heavier weight and losing weight, then, maybe, and I know you see that advice in a lot of carnivore groups, it's like, this is all about health. And so you should eat the fat, eat the fattiest cuts and everything, because that's going to help restore health. And, a lot of people end up struggling. And I see all the time people in carnivore groups who give up because they're like, I'm gaining weight on this and I don't feel good. And this is supposed to be so healing and so effective. And yet, I love the idea, the notion that you just eat animal foods in any, quantities, and because they're so, single ingredients, so good for you, your body's just going to restore health to your most glorious, vibrant, healthy self. But if you're coming from an unbalanced situation where you have a lot of weight to lose and a hormonal imbalance, then you can't just do that, right? There has to be
Exactly.
some calculation to it.
Yeah, and look at Paul. He's never really had a weight issue. So, yeah, he needs the higher fat because he's very active and all that.
Yes.
So, again, it goes back to your why. Why are you doing this? And if it's weight loss, your body has plenty of fat that it can use already. So let it use it. And especially, again, if it's insulin resistance, you want to shrink those adipose. And so to do that, you got to dial the dietary fat down a bit. Yes, the why is very important because if it's Alzheimer's or your why is bipolar disease, some of these things where you may want more ketones and things going through the body to help the brain and whatnot, maybe you prioritize that over weight loss and you up the dietary fat to support, maybe putting some of those symptoms into remission or putting them down. So again, that your why is very, very important as far as why you want to do it.
I think too, I have had a lot of people get a lot of success from doing a traditional high-fat keto with a moderated protein because they're coming from standard American diet where they're very addicted to carbs and sugar, and it really helps make that transition. Like Marie and I both say, like if we would have gone from standard American to what we do now, we would have both like, no, I can't do that, but keto provides this kind of like soft landing where you can have fat bombs and learn how to make healthier treats and like shift over into it more easily. So I think
Well, and what's interesting is if people do an honest analysis of their diet before and after, we have a lot of clients that when they were in a standard American diet and then they went to the keto we prescribed to them, the only thing that changed was carbs.
Yes.
They were eating high fat, moderate protein, high carb before. They just cut out the carbs. So in that respect, it's, coming from the standard American diet to pretty much anything whole foods based, it's going to be a massive improvement. But if and the other thing too about the, carnivore, eat all you want until you're stuffed, there's a lot of people out there, and we have lots of clients that, they have leptin resistance. They just don't get the I'm full signal, and they could literally just eat pounds of meat and, tons of calories. And calories still do matter, right? Macros, I think, matter more, and how they modulate hormones. But, calories still matter. And these people that have leptin resistance, they don't get the signal that I'm full, and they just can eat. And then when they follow that advice, they end up either not losing or gaining, and they get frustrated, and they say it didn't work for me. But if you look at and do it the right way, where you fairly moderate amount of protein, little to no carbs, and then you adjust fat based on the goals, then you start to see the results.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is that a lot of times we get into these debates, say like calories in versus calories out, and then the endocrine hormonal theory of weight loss, and then it's often that the truth is kind of somewhere in between. Like you need a little bit of both. And like I know, for example, knowing your resting metabolic rate can be helpful, if your goal is weight loss, to kind of get a picture of like how many calories are you actually burning, even though there's a lot more to it than that. It doesn't hurt to kind of have that information too, because if you get a body scan or something, you can figure out what your lean mass is, and then you can figure out like what the right amount of protein is for you. And I know you guys have a formula, I think is 0.8 times your lean body mass. So to figure out how much protein.
Yep. Yeah, that's what we start people out. And that's a goal. So that's kind of you can almost consider it as a minimum. Like you need to get at least that much to make sure you get enough for rebuilding the body. The body's always rebuilding. You're constantly building new skin and other tissues, and it's always rebuilding itself. It's also this interesting thing about how much is turned over each day. And
yes, it's 200 to 300 grams of protein in the cell is turned over.
So basically, I think it's like 3 months, you're all
Yes.
new cells.
Yeah, that's the Dr. Yoshinori Osumi, who won the Nobel Prize for autophagy. He came up with those figures. These like every 3 months, every 2 to 3 months, and he says between 200 to 300 grams per day is just recycled at the cellular level. So,
so it's pretty amazing. I mean, there's
the
constant need for that protein. So that's why that's kind of a minimum or threshold. And again, I can't remember where you were going with the protein. So we recommend 0.8 times lean mass is kind of a goal or minimum to start with.
Yeah. So I was curious if you ever recommend to people to do any testing on themselves with their blood glucose to figure that out, because I just had Dr. Angela Stanton on before you, and she does a lot of work with electrolytes and migraines and finding the right protein amount for people who have migraines, and the electrolyte and protein amounts are different with the people that she works with. But she has this really neat rule of thumb, which I had never heard about before, just for carnivores, to figure out if they have the right protein amount is to test after a meal, and 1 to 1.5 hours after, if blood glucose drops, then she says that means you didn't have enough protein. But if you over consume protein, you'll see in the 5 hours following that nothing happens, and then suddenly blood glucose goes up.
I haven't heard that before, and I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the studies or information she's basing that on.
I mean, part of it has to do with like what your pancreas is anticipating you're going to have at that meal. So if you undereat, then it'll overshoot the insulin, and if you overeat, there won't be enough. I think that's probably part of it, but also because, like you said, even it takes a long time for protein to be broken down, which is why the 4 to 5 hours peak as opposed to the 2 hour peak. But if people want to use a glucometer, to help them find out what that protein, like that they're hitting enough of that protein threshold to trigger muscle protein synthesis, but they're not eating too much that they're going to prevent themselves getting to their goals.
Yeah, what we find is that traditionally and kind of across the board, especially women, don't get enough dietary protein. It's very common for them to eat lower protein. And when they go carnivore, suddenly the body's like, hey, I got protein, I got to do all this rebuilding. And that doesn't reflect on the scale, right? And that's what we see a lot of times with clients too, is that the scale is deceiving. If you gain muscle while losing fat, the scale's not going to change, and that can be frustrating. And that's definitely, I think, applicable with carnivore. And we have a picture in here of Ted Neiman's before after, Dr. Ted Neiman, when he was vegan, and then after a protein focused approach, essentially keto. He's the same weight in both photos, but he looks drastically different in body composition. And so that's what we try to focus people on when they go carnivore, is focus on body composition, focus on, measurements, how you feel, and ditch the scale for a while, because it can be deceiving, especially in the beginning. If you've been eating low protein for a long time, the body's going to gobble those up and really start building protein again.
Yeah, I noticed that in my recent body scan from 2 years ago. I only lost about 10 pounds, but my body fat went from 34 to 21. And wow. I gained 8 pounds of lean mass. And I don't work out. I mean, that's just from eating a lot of protein. So
if you haven't been getting enough for your body for a long time, it's going to gobble those up. And
exactly.
Even if you're not working out, it's going to rebuild what it needs to rebuild.
Exactly. I had a couple other topics I just want to touch on quickly with my last question. So one thing that's debated a lot, and we've talked about this before, is sodium and electrolytes. There's long-term carnivores saying that they don't use any sodium. Most of the science and research out there that is, especially in our community, shows that we do need to add sodium, and that the government guidelines are way too low. They're associated with the highest mortality. So we need to add sodium on especially keto and carnivore diets as well. Now, is there any issue there with sort of adding sodium, say, to your meat to taste, that you might be throwing off like the natural ratios of sodium to potassium? And because I do see a lot of people that I work with will say, well, they don't want to add sodium to their food because when they do add sodium, then they feel like they retain water. But I'm trying to explain to them that that's actually more of a dehydration state where the body's clinging on to water because it's holding it, because the body is dehydrated from not enough sodium.
Yeah, that's, I think this is, excuse me, a very individual thing in that, I've seen a wide range of people on keto or carnivore and what their salt intake is. And some people can just salt their food to taste and it's fine. They don't have to add any extra. They don't have to worry about adding to water or, electrolyte. And then other people really have to be mindful about it. I know Dave Feldman is, he eats close to carnivore most of the time, and he gets about 10 grams of sodium a day. That's usually, we tell people about 4 to 5 grams is a good goal for sodium. That's about 2.5 teaspoons of salt, sea salt. He gets about 5 teaspoons of salt a day. He'll take his meat and it's just like a snow crust of salt on it. But to him, that is salting to taste. That doesn't taste too salty to him, and he feels best when he's got that 10 grams of sodium in his diet. Versus, other people, if they get 4 or 5 grams, they might feel totally fine. So I think it's a very individual thing. And he's also a tall guy and a big guy, so sure that has some to do with it as well. But myself, I feel best when I add some sodium. We do the element electrolytes, and I add 1 to 2 of those a day just to make sure I'm getting enough sodium, because I don't salt my food a lot. I don't know if that's just taste or just what I'm used to, of not adding a ton of salt to my food. I will to a steak or something, but like here I have poke or fish, I won't add too much salt to it, so I'll add some sodium. But I think electrolytes are very important, and one of the things is sodium. Especially if you're coming from a standard American diet to, say, carnivore, where you're eating just steaks and whole foods, they don't come with salt. All the center of the grocery store is loaded with sodium. The milkshake at McDonald's has more sodium than the French fries. There's sodium everywhere in the standard American diet, and so when you come to steak, there's no sodium, none. So you have to be mindful about adding that sodium to make sure you're getting enough sodium. Potassium, animal proteins are loaded with potassium, so I'm not as worried about potassium. But then magnesium is another one where we used to get a lot of it from our water supply. And today with bottled water, filtered water, and plus the topsoils are being depleted, so there's less magnesium in the soil. So we just aren't getting magnesium like we used to. Like 70-80% of Americans, no matter what their diet is, are deficient in magnesium. And so I think supplementing with magnesium can be helpful for just about everybody. So that's how we approach electrolytes. Is you probably get enough potassium from your food if you're eating this way. Add a magnesium supplement, because most people are deficient anyway. And then salt as to how you feel. If you don't have a lot of energy, add some salt, and just kind of go by your body.
So my last question, I'm really curious as to your opinion on this, because I know you've worked with thousands of people over the years and a lot of women of different age groups. So I recently was having an exchange with, I'm not sure if you know Ella Bruce on Twitter, and so she's in Australia. She's a bodybuilder, and she's done a ton of research and articles on biochemistry. And some women, I've always been of the camp, like there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. We know that from biochemistry, our liver can make it on demand, right?
Yep.
there are some women that seem to thrive when they not thrive as much when they don't have any carbs, and bringing in a small amount back into their diet seems to help with their sex hormones and hormonal function. And I never understood why. I had a debate with Vivica Menendez about this, and I was like, there's no biochemical pathway that I know of, that I understand. And Ella recently was saying that it has to do with the fact that we have stored glycogen in the liver, and that the body uses that as an indicator of like safety or something in terms of your like reproduction and just like overall, safety. Like if your liver, it makes kind of sense if your liver would be filled up with glycogen, that you would be kind of in like a secure state food wise or whatnot, or environment wise. And so she has found that by adding 1 gram of carb per pound or per kilo of lean body mass, that it helps women when they're hitting like some kind of issue or wall with regards to their hormones. And I'm just curious, based on your experience of working with so many women, because I think it has to do specifically with women who have lower body fat percentage.
Yeah.
Because there's like this rate limited amount of energy, of calories, that you can draw down from your own fat reserves. And that's kind of like the connection there.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex situation and issue. I think there definitely is a component of being very, very lean, and that can change things. In general, we work with Dr. Kiltz, who's one of the top fertility doctors in America, and he, it's all about, for them, it's all about fat for hormones. And so, again, what are your goals? If it's fertility issues like that, he puts everybody on a keto, and it's a little higher fat keto approach to boost hormones, because all sex hormones are made from cholesterol and saturated fat. So boosting dietary fat can help. But if your goal is to be lean and be a athlete like it sounds like, maybe the goals are slightly different.
Yeah.
I would say that in general, the clients we do see that talk about this, again, not the very lean case, which is kind of a side case. Majority of women who see these type of things happening, it's usually one of a couple things. One of it is, common one is energy. Well, usually they aren't getting their electrolytes, and that's why the energy is low. So when they up the carbohydrates, it forces the body to retain more water, because carbohydrates retain water.
Yeah.
And that fixes the electrolyte issue, which makes them feel better. That's one issue. Another one is typically a progesterone imbalance. The body stores excess estrogens, or bad estrogens, like environmental estrogens, and these things from flax or things from plastics, all these environmental estrogens that can get into the body. It stores them in your fat cells, just like it stores other toxins. And so when you lose body fat, they get released. And so you get this imbalance that can happen in hormones, where you get in an estrogen dominant state and low progesterone as a result. And so doing things while you're losing weight to fix the progesterone deficiency will fix the problem. Things like you're not being able to sleep well, where you wake up at 2 a.m., and you're wide awake, that's low progesterone. So if you fix the progesterone issue while you lose weight, detox the bad estrogens that are being dumped into the body, get rid of the estrogen imbalance, now the hormones are back in balance and everything's fine. You don't need the carbs to offset that. To me, when the majority of the cases we see, it's really masking another issue when they add the carbs. And so that's what
I never would have thought of that with adding the carbs and the lack of electrolytes, because actually in those situations, it's also with carnivores that I've been speaking to who don't supplement with electrolytes and sodium. Yeah. So that's probably it. Thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. Where can everybody get your fantastic new book, and check out all these awesome charts and resources in here.
You get it on most channels, Amazon, etc. We also just came out with a carnivore ebook that has a bunch more recipes that didn't make it in that book. That's at keto-adapted.com.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, so keto-adapted.com is where you can get our ebooks and support. And then tons of free information that we put out on our blog at mariamindbodyhealth.com.
I'm sorry, I have one question I forgot to ask you, if you don't mind. Have you heard anything about collagen turning into oxalate in the body?
Yeah, some people talked about that on one of our groups, and
Sally Norton, I think, said that it can happen.
Sally Norton? Oh, okay. I didn't see the article from her, but yeah, I don't think that is the case in practical terms. Like, the body wants collagen, and it's gonna kind of like dietary protein. It's gonna break down those amino acids and use it to do things. There's no reason for it to randomly turn that into oxalates, which the body doesn't want, right? I mean, if you think it from a biological perspective, the body's not dumb. Like, it's kind of like the whole gluconeogenesis thing.
Yeah.
It's not going to waste energy to turn this fuel into a fuel when it's got all this other fat and fuel sitting there waiting to be used. It's not going to do that because, evolutionary, that wouldn't have worked out well for us. Like,
yeah.
And get, even back to the whole, eating super high fat, somehow this fat just like goes through your system or something. It doesn't get digested. From an evolutionary perspective, that makes no sense. If you are in, our Neanderthal or, early human ancestors, and the body just starts dumping all this fat that you're eating out of its body because you're eating a lot of fat and it doesn't store it, you die in the winter. Like, you gotta, when things are abundant, you gotta store all that. And so the body, it just doesn't make sense from an evolutionary perspective or how the body works. And I think that's kind of part of what this is too.
Yeah, it's like a car running out of gas and then suddenly starting to burn the door handles and the spark plugs and stuff.
Well, actually, it's more like the gas tank's full and it just starts burning spark plugs. Like,
exactly. Awesome. Well, Craig, thank you so much for being back on the show today. It was a pleasure having you, and I hope you guys are not stranded in paradise for too long, but I'm a little jealous, I have to admit. Hawaii sounds great right now.
Yeah, thanks, and stay safe.
You too, Craig. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to the episode today with Craig. It was such a blast to really dive deep on all of the protein and fat ratios, which are so hotly debated in the carnivore space, and also get some insights as well on sodium intake, electrolytes, and carbs, and hormone function. So hope you guys really enjoyed that episode. If you did, share it with someone that you think might like it too. And leave me any feedback over on Instagram. Leave me a rating or review here. I love reading your reviews. It absolutely makes my day. So until the next episode, if you want to try out keto with a coach, you can do it with me as your coach and guide, and head over to ketogenicgirl.com and check out any of the meal plans that I have there for keto carnivore. For carnivore, I just put the pre-order link for the new carnivore plans I'm working on releasing later this spring if you want to check those out. And you can join the group at any time and start enjoying the company of other people doing this with you and getting to know everyone else in the group, and post any questions that you have as we go along to help you get the results that you want to see. So thank you all for watching and listening, and until the next episode, I'm wishing you a fat-fueled rest of your day.